We are right on the outskirts of the village, but I thought that the village sign was so magnificent and so fitting, if you like, even though it's kind of grey day, that you don't see signs like that every day. So I thought, what a great place for us to start on the edge of Lavenham, with this beautiful sign here marking the Market Charter 1257 under King Henry III. And a few other little markers related to other stories around things that happened here. One we'll talk about a little bit later is, if you can see it, there's a bomb on here somewhere. Very squadron, so if any of you have people related to the 487 squadron, this is where they were based, and they colloquially were known as the Gentlemen from Hell. So Alice with us, KCM, thank you very much. And you'll see here the bomb we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So we are in Lavenham, and we're going to walk into the village. The signal, by the way, is mostly okay, but there's a few patchy spots, so don't worry too much. If we get a bit shaky, it should sort itself out very, very quickly. So Lavenham has been described as the finest medieval town in England. Could be a village, town, whatever you want to call it. It's got more than 300 buildings listed of being of architectural and historic interest. And it's one of what they call Suffolk's wall towns. In the year 1524, it was actually the 14th wealthiest town in the country. It's also known as the food capital of Suffolk, and it's colloquially known as Wonky Town. And you're going to see why it certainly lives up to its name on our walk. So we're going to walk into the village, down the high street, and then we're going to have a kind of nice explore. So if we're all battened down, we're all kind of comfortable, we will begin our exploration. Hi everybody who's joined just as we started. You're very welcome joining me here in Lavenham. It's a rather grey, damp day, but equally it's very, very quiet. So hopefully we'll get the place to ourselves and we can enjoy. Linda is with us. Hi Linda, and welcome to Godric's Hollow. So this town, like a lot of Suffolk, was founded originally in the Anglo-Saxon period. And the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Suffolk and kind of East Anglia generally occurred on a large scale. It's believed that the Iceni tribe populated this part of the world. So Boudica, I'm sure you'll have heard of, was famously the chief of the Iceni. Well, they were sort of based in this area. And that's largely after the Romans depopulated and left the area behind. So by the 5th century onwards, this was very much an Anglo-Saxon kingdom. And not unsurprisingly, they had North folk and South folk. Hence, of course, the locals don't call it. I'm not sure they do. I'm sure they don't. But I'm sure they don't mind the numbers of tourists that come and spend lots of money here. So North folk and South folk. So Norfolk and Suffolk. Okay, so that's kind of straightforward. Little primer on how we get them. Let's kind of cross over because we're going to see the first of our sort of magnificent buildings. Yep. Oh yes, postcards for Linda's. So hopefully you might vote mine today. But we can talk about that a little bit later on. So I'm just going to try and get us across the road safely. Sadly, it is fairly busy with the traffic, which is always a kind of downside because when you sort of get these idyllic places, you want them to be sort of traffic free. But of course, the world doesn't stop just for Heygo, so we have to do our best to manage the traffic. So before the Norman conquest, this was held under the Thane of Ulwin. And then in 1086, where the kind of records of England kind of first start, we know that the estate was in the possession of Aubrey de Vere. And Aubrey de Vere is an ancestor of the first Earl of Oxford. So it kind of passes into the estates of the Earls of Oxford. There was a vineyard planted here, and they held sway until 1604 when it was sold to Sir Thomas Skinner. And from that moment onwards, Lavenham moves into the wool trade. This house, it's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, love it. And with its famous blue broadcloth, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on, it becomes exceptionally wealthy from exporting cloth. It's one of the richest towns in the British Isles, ends up paying more tax than York and Lincoln. And the Springer family of which kind of owned an awful lot of the land around here, had an awful lot of these houses built, were the kind of wealthiest of the merchants, but everybody here did well. So there's a really interesting building of note, a former chapel just coming up. It's an arts interior design, but it really kind of caught my eye as we were walking down. And London Plain Street. Did you see Plain Street? These. Sorry, spinning a bit around. Are they Plain Streets? Maybe. I couldn't say for certain. They've certainly been pollarded, haven't they, to within an inch of their life. They could be. I don't know. It's hard to tell. But we've got some in York that are not dissimilar. So this building really kind of caught my eye. Entirely kind of out of character with the rest of the village. But very interesting nonetheless. Not least for its enormous kind of outsize furniture. We're going to talk a little bit Harry Potter later on. You would have to say that a chair of that size, well, we know who's Harry's friend that might want a very large chair indeed. I'm sure we're on the same page there. Hagrid, isn't it? So we've got some rather wonderful lions here that appear to be, is it Hagrid's? I think so too. I want to say it's Hagrid's chair. It's almost like driftwood. I'm not quite sure what the construction is there, but I like them enormously. So you've got a pair of them here that are stood sentinel. That's the word I think we're looking at. Not like London Plain. They could well be, Susan. One tree to one. I don't know. I don't think so. No, you can sort of see, if you sort of peer into them, you can see that there is, not how well you can kind of see in this light, but basically I can just see that there is some kind of skeletal inside. So I think, no, they are kind of pinned together. But aren't they fantastic? Aren't they beautiful? So Hagrid has another chair over here. So any giants coming out? A little vertical shot. We can indeed. Let me just... I'm just trying to keep my kit dry because the rain is coming down rather hard. So just bear with me one sec. And we'll pull back. And there we go. I'll come round so you can get from the front as well. But aren't they fab? Let's have two in one shot, which I think works very nicely. And then we'll come round from the front. So get that bin out there. How fab are they? Oh, Joanne's got rain as well. Let's just cross. So you may have noticed, by the way, that there's a lot of pink buildings here. And those that aren't so familiar with Suffolk might not know about the famous Suffolk pink. And villages and towns in Suffolk are kind of renowned for their historic pink-washed walls and halls and cottages. And it becomes known as... They come alive to me, absolutely, of course they would. It's become known as Suffolk pink. So decorative paint colours sort of found in the county can range from a kind of pale shell shade to deep blush sort of brick colour. It really kind of varies. But according to research, Suffolk pink dates back to the 14th century, where shades were developed by local dyers by adding natural substances to a traditional lime wash mix. And they used things including pig or ox blood with buttermilk, elderberries and sloe juice. So consequently, it was kind of worked into. Now, this is much paler. How old are these homes? Well, most of these homes are going to date from the 15th and the 16th century. So Suffolk pink, many think, should be dark. It should be kind of terracotta, rather than this kind of pastel pink. So this one, I suppose, is very, very bright pink. It's very so more of a kind of reddish pink, really. And there's been kind of controversy about this when homeowners and business owners have decorated their properties in colours that don't match. And famously, in 2013, I'm sure you all heard of the bad boy chef Marco Pierre White. Well, he painted his restaurant the wrong hue of pink, the Angel at Lavenham in the Market Square, and they made him paint it again. So that didn't go down at all well. The local authorities put their foot down and said, that's not Suffolk pink, you need to do it again. So even the enfant terrible of haute cuisine was forced to eat humble pie and to repaint exactly tut his property to make sure that it was the right shade of pink. And in one case, the council forced 3 neighbouring houses to all paint in the same shade. because historically it'd been one property, so they wanted to, if you like, restore the integrity of the building. So we're going to see a lot of crooked houses today. And this is known as kind of crooked houses of Lavenham. And everyone knows, of course, the rhyme about the crooked man, his crooked cat, crooked mouse, they also live in a crooked house. And this rhyme dates from, does Doris Umbridge live in the pink house? Hold that thought. So this rhyme from the 1840s is meant to be inspired. We're going to show you the house in a minute. It inspired it. But the question comes is, why are there so many crooked houses here? And the simple reason for that is they were put up so quickly. There was an absolute rush and demand for labour, and of course an awful lot of wealthy people in Lavenham on this huge kind of flush of cash coming in. But unfortunately, in the speed of construction, they built many of them using green timber. In other words, it's not being dried out. So as the timber came to then dry out and to mature, it twisted and formed, if you like, its natural kind of long-term shape. So it is very, very characteristic of this village or town, whatever you want to describe it, that this is one of the straighter ones, as you might say. So as I say, they're not constructed to be wonky on purpose, and it's not even purely just age. It's largely because they went about it in such a hurry, so that consequently, as I say, as that timber seasoned, as it dried out, it changed. And what it means is that it's the devilishly difficult, because some of them, the slope, they are so beautiful, aren't they? They slope to such a degree that it can be very, very difficult to walk from one room to another, because, of course, as the joists twist and turn and kind of come out of shape, so, of course, the floors do as well. For timber, yes, of course. I mean, you couldn't sort of season everything, but there is a degree of how long you kind of leave the green timbering before you kind of use it. But so it does make for a very, very kind of special experience. Yeah, Chesterfield got the Twisted Spire, that's right, in Derbyshire. But I mean, just what is immediately impacting is this sound. If I kind of stand here, just look at the quantity of fabulous buildings that are all around us. I'm sorry, Christina, I can't read that. But it is... Did they realise... Well, I don't... As with all things, they didn't think that people were looking at the houses 500 years later, I think is the first thing to say, Joanne. They were simply building houses for themselves and for their kind of workforces. So I don't suppose they gave a great deal of thought to what the centuries would kind of bring. I suppose it's inevitable that they knew it would happen to some degree, but it is a busy street for wizards. But nonetheless, as I say, they have this boom town going on. So they're throwing up all these buildings, but then the bottom fell out of the market. You suddenly got this competition. Dutch emigres from living in Colchester in nearby Essex began producing cloth, which was both sort of cheaper and lighter and kind of trendier. So the town's business collapses, and the people of Lavenham kind of lost their wealth. So they had no money to... Well, they're not black and white, because a lot of these are Suffolk pink. So we've talked about the Suffolk pink being a tradition, and it's just very colourful around here. There's lots of towns, aren't there, that are kind of colourful like this. Tobermory in Scotland, Portmeirion in Wales. There's quite a few, aren't there? So, consequently, the bottom fell out of the market. There was no money to repair the houses, and so people had to live with crooked houses. And so the crooked houses of Lavenham has become the thing. They are, aren't they? They're absolutely delightful. Absolutely delightful. Rush hour starting a little bit... Well, we're doing okay. I don't think we're doing... But this, of course, is, at number 7, the High Street, is the kind of doozy of all of them, of all the crooked houses. You're about to see a house that is one of the most photographed in the world. It's an Instagram sensation. It is the famous crooked house. So even amongst crooked houses, this one here in the middle takes some beating. It is dates from 1395. Now look at the angle as I come closer. Incredibly crooked, isn't it? Incredibly. Do you want to give me? Shall I give you a vertical shot? Let me just come through there. So close your eyes, forget the brush thickness. But look at that. Now you get a sense of quite how crooked we're talking. I mean, it is mad. So it's one of the most photographed homes in the world. You know, even in this village, this is, if you like, you know, the kind of standout. And it's said that this is the house that inspired the poem. There was a crooked man who walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence upon a crooked spile. He brought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. So we're going to go around the outside property. Everything's closed today, actually. I was hoping to be able to go in National Trust, take some photos in the Guildhall, but everything is shut, being a Monday. So consequently, we are going to... the floor does slope terribly. It must be really hard to walk inside, but it is much loved. You can only imagine, can't you, the delight of visiting there, staying there. Sorry, I do beg your pardon. But, so, last shots there. So, as I say, that is the place, the poem, the nursery rhyme, shall we say. So, the Greyhound pub, next to us. Shall we cross over so we can get a nice shot of the swan as well? This famously is very disorientating. I think very, very disorientating. Dates back to the 15th century, this pub. And famously, Napoleon Bonaparte stayed here on his passage through the country prior to his exile. He was said to stay here. Is the house habituated? Yes, he's lived in. Yes, it absolutely is. So it's owned by two lovely guys who host dinners there and a variety of events and functions. So if you're in this country, you can very much go and visit. So these angels here, look at these putties, these caught my eye either side of the doorway there. Aren't they just delightful? So yeah, for the pink, for those that missed it, as I say, it's famously known as Suffolk pink. It comes in a variety of hues and shades. But yeah, we're going to be going. Yeah, Poppy, don't panic. You're going to see all the main bits that you want to see. We're going to get to as we're going to walk around the village. You have a crooked meal, absolutely. So everything relating, of course, to cloth, the production of cloth, weavers, dyers, you name it. That was everybody was employed, if you like, within the same industry. Now we're coming up on the very, very famous, those that visited, the Swan Pub. And again, it's formerly three buildings. One of Lavenham's was some of the most famous hotels. It's built in about 1400. And it consists, and again, I'm going to try and cross over so you can get a nicer view. The light's kind of really coming down. It's a little bit earlier than I expected to, but nonetheless. So you can see here, it is in effect, this is the picture that I used as the image for this tour. So that's how that was going. Was National Trust? Yeah, it is. National Trust is the Guildhall in the Market Square, but we're going to see that a little bit later on. Just walking along, so you can see here the Swan. If anybody knows the story of Howard Marks, the famous dope smuggler, Mr. Nice in his books, he was arrested here in the bar in 1918 when he was on the run. So yeah, Alex, the houses moved over time. As the green wood and timber dried out, they began to twist, and by the time it became apparent how big a problem this was, the bottom had fallen out of the woad market, and the Lavenham blue cloth was not selling anything like the quantities it previously had, and so consequently there wasn't the money to deal with it. So we're going to turn into Water Street now, which takes its name from the stream which runs underneath Blythe Houses. And this street was chosen by the Harry Potter filmmakers for the film Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows for basically the location of Godric's Hollow. So the Swan Pub was the Hogshead Inn, scene of a pivotal discovery in the Harry Potter story. I'm just going to kind of cross us over. So Godric's Hollow, historically, is important to the wizarding world. It's a celebrated village where Voldemort was first defeated. So Godric's Hollow was inhabited by a number of notable wizarding families. The Dumbledore family, Bathilda Bagshot, both resided here in the village. Godric Gryffindor is where it gets its name from. It's the birthplace of Godric Gryffindor, and also the final resting place of at least one of the Peverell family. It's also where Bowman Wright, the wizarding smith, forged the first golden snitch. So this really is, if you like, wizarding central. In the history of magic, though, Matilda Bagshot writes that Godric's Hollow was one of a number of villages where wizards settled in relatively large numbers after the ratification of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1689. So large numbers of witches and wizards grouped together to provide support for each other. Imagine living in these buildings, can't you? After they'd been facing many years of persecution at the hands of the Muggles. So they found safety in numbers here in Godric's Hollow. And it's perhaps most famous as the place where Harry Potter and his parents lived when he was a baby, where they were murdered and where Lord Voldemort met his first downfall. So Voldemort came to the village when he heard of the prophecy. And Dumbledore tells us that he first heard of the prophecy on a cold, wet night 16 years ago in a room above the bar in the Hogshead Inn. Hogshead Inn, just behind us. I'd gone there to see an applicant for the post of the divination teacher. Sybil Trelawney was the seer who foretold the prophecy. And the prophecy foretold the coming of a boy who would have the power to vanquish Lord Voldemort. And the prophecy was made while Trelawney was having an interview with Dumbledore for the post of divination teacher at Hogwarts School. So Severus Snape... Sorry, Yeah, sorry. The rain's coming down very hard now. So Severus Snape, who at the time was working for Voldemort, was caught eavesdropping on Trelawney and Dumbledore by the owner of the Hogshead. And he was subsequently thrown out of the pub. So Snape then went and returned to Voldemort to tell him what he'd heard. And after months of searching, Voldemort finally discovered where James and Lily Potter were hiding, and that they were using the Fidelius charm to conceal themselves. Within a week of being named secret keeper, Peter Pettigrew betrayed the Potters, and Voldemort was able to enter their Godric's Hollow home. So this is the house the filmmakers chose for the Potter's Cottage, just opposite. It's in the movie, but not all of them. Okay. So apologies if you can't see this building, but it's invisible to Muggles, because Matilda Bagshot made note that Godric's Hollow was a place where wizards had to hide in plain sight. So the invisibility charm, see the corner house, please? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, was used. So of course it meant that the properties couldn't be seen, because it wasn't a purely wizarding village. So Hogsmeade Village was the only purely wizarding village in Britain. So the residents of Godric's Hollow still had to have avoid kind of open use of magic to avoid disturbing the Muggles. So just turn around so you want to see the corner building. Isn't it just magnificent? So this is why the monuments of the Potter family were hidden. And similarly, the Potter house on the edge of the village was charmed to be invisible to Muggles, but it was visible to Voldemort, who visited the house on that terrible night. And while here, he murdered James and Lily, who died trying to protect their infant son. So I'm trying to get around the back of the... In the process of trying to murder Harry, Voldemort's killing curse backfired on him and destroyed his body. And this caused Voldemort's already mangled soul to become even more unstable. And thus, he left a fragment behind. Harry was protected from Voldemort's killing curse because Lily had lovingly sacrificed herself to save Harry. And this imbued him with a charm that prevented Voldemort from harming him. Dumbledore furthered this magic by sending Harry to live with his aunt and his uncle, because while at 4 Privet Drive, Harry's blood protection from Lily would be preserved, as the blood lives on in both him and Lily's sister, Petunia Dursley, Lily's only known biological relative. So despite Dumbledore explaining all this in an open letter to Petunia, Petunia never really accepts Harry. She won't treat him as her own. And we all know, those that read the book, that Harry had a pretty miserable life there. But crucially, he had the protection. As long as he visited at least once a year, the magical protection will be around him. So Harry would always be associated with Godric's Hollow, and in turn it became famous as the home of the boy who lived. So despite all this, Harry doesn't revisit the village until the Christmas of 1997, and we'll pick up that story a little bit later on. So yeah, apologies for those that aren't au fait with Harry Potter, but I'm sure you can get a forgive because the visuals are so beautiful that we couldn't help but picking up on that kind of narrative. For the Harry Potter fans, isn't it just absolutely perfect? Let me just get a sip of water and we will go down further. Shame about the weather. I'm just getting me water. But have you ever seen a village with so many perfect buildings as this? It is absolutely enchanting. So, have I missed any questions, by the way? Because love to me with I know it's absolutely gorgeous, isn't it, Tris? Because it's getting difficult because the rain, so I've got water on my glasses, the light isn't kind of fantastic, perfectly imperfect, absolutely. But aren't they just magnificent? I mean, the whole thing is just beguiling. This is why someone brings it. Well, because it's nowhere near where I live. I'm on my way to visit my mum. We're down in Suffolk. I don't live. This isn't in northern England. This is in the south. So it's not really on my patch at all. It is purely an opportunity that I didn't want to miss because I knew I was going to be in this part of the world. So I thought, right, I'll come here. And if I come again soon, there's a few other places around here that are beautifully well worth seeing as well. But it's just, building after building. Got to take the kids to lunch now. It was marvellous. Thank you. No problem, Linda. Hopefully see you a little bit later on. Hope the kids enjoyed that little bit of Potter. So again, we've got varieties of this mustard yellow and the famous pink as well. So thank you, Linda. That's very kind of you. Is it fucking? Oh yeah, we're about 200 miles away. Yeah. We're nowhere near York. So I'll just cross us over. So again, just get a view looking down. Yes, James, that's where we're about to go into Shilling Street. So hold that thought for just a moment or two, and we'll come to the story of Jane Taylor. So again, like you see, we've got Weaver's Cottages here, circa 1340. So of course, what we've got is some very, very grand buildings and some less grand buildings, because obviously you've got the workforce and the owners. So these are a good deal more modest in size. But of course, thank you everybody, Becky and Hans. So not all the properties are vast, or rather not all of them are occupied by one family. Many of them, of course, subdivided to reflect a kind of social status, isn't it? I mean, it's no so great sort of surprise, but they are all so charming. Hi, Viola. Yes, it's we're in Suffolk, northeast. Good description, Janet. Thank you for sort of setting it out. So nowhere near the north. So this is just I'm on a holiday from the north, as you might say. So we're taking you somewhere we hadn't been otherwise. And culture, Twinkle Little Star. Well, Susan, Jane Taylor lived here, and we're going to see the cottage. So let's show you where she lived. So everyone keeps mentioning about Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So for those that are slightly bemused, why it keeps getting mentioned? It's because it's one of those sort of nursery rhymes, isn't it? That it's almost hard to imagine it not existing. It's such a part of our youth, isn't it, as you might say, our childhood, that it's hard to imagine it isn't there. But of course, there was a time when it didn't exist. It was written. And it was written by somebody who lived in this street with a family. A lady called Jane Taylor. And she lives here in Shilling Street. So we are now in Shilling Street. We'll see what we can do. About the doors. So she wrote the lyrics to the nursery rhyme Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It was set to a tune that already exists. It's a French tune. So she was born in London, was Jane Taylor, and she lived with a family including fellow author sister Anne Taylor at Shilling Grange, and that is, I think it's this one here. You have to apologise, I haven't been down here for a while, but is the author of Harry Potter known in this village? No, not to our knowledge. It was the filmmakers that here I say Jane Taylor's cottage. So the interesting thing about the Harry Potter things is she wrote most of the books, or at least scripted most of it, before the first one was even published. So an awful lot of the links to Harry Potter now are about where the film was kind of shot rather than where she was, because, as I say, she lived in Edinburgh. So it was first published, the Twinkle Twinkle Star, in original poems for infant minds, or rather, this was the first publication. And because it was largely comprised of the works of 3 female authors, the 2 sisters Taylors, and a lady called, is it Adele Harvey? I can't remember her name. Have I got that written down in my notes? Let me have a look. Yeah, Adele Harvey. And because they were female, of course, this is 1804, they couldn't be published under their own name. We're sort of back to that. Adelaide O'Keefe, sorry, I beg pardon. And she was a daughter of an Irish playwright and actor, John O'Keefe. And so they actually thought she was a kind of lesser talent because she's written for the stage. She wasn't kind of seen in the same sort of bracket, if you like, as the 2 sisters. And isn't this beautiful, this house here? So in 1805, because of the success of the first volume, they wanted kind of more material. And so this is when Twinkle Star appeared. My daughter used to call it Twinkle Star. Isn't this? Look at this. Isn't it beautiful? So it's sort of one of those things, isn't it? It's kind of hard to imagine a world without it. But for that, I can't imagine for a minute that there's anybody on here that doesn't know the tune. But if I can find it, I did have a file here. Gosh, this rain's coming down hard now, so just so we know what we're talking about. You hear that? Yeah, we'll do that to that. So I think is that the view that you're looking at? I know Jan just popped off now for a little kip, so sorry about that. That's anything to snoozers. But I thought there can't be anybody who doesn't know, but we should never make assumptions. So for just anybody that's been living on Mars, that is the famous Twinkle Little Star. So Anne and Jane Taylor obviously became very well kind of established as authors and poets for children. But as I say, it was hard work in those days. Being women, the assumption was, it wasn't proper occupation. Did you have some kind of weekend? I can't read. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, Susan, with the Colchester link, simply that this is where they lived. So it's associated with Lavenham as well. So let's just walk. It's getting really rather dark. I don't think it's as much the time of day. I think it's that we don't have stars. Yes, it is a French tune. So, Alex, what is it actually about originally? Alex is on from France, so let's just take a bit of information. Everything is lovely in this village. We're spoiling it's an absolute delight to be here. But let's walk on, because the time is getting on and the light is going down, and there's lots more I want to show you before the light deserts us, although I think it'll be very, very cool if we get some lovely twilight. But this rain is starting to annoy me now. So we're going to come into Bolton Street next, famously in the Bolton Bomb. But we look at this as kind of being a picturesque place, but actually, as with anywhere, it's had its share of trouble. And during the reign of Henry VIII, Lavenham was the scene of serious resistance to what are called Wolsey's Amicable Grant. So, of course, it's a taxation, raising money to fight a war with France. But it happened without the consent of Parliament. And so in 1525, 10,000 men from Lavenham, who were said to gather down here, starting in Bolton Street, and sort of men from Lavenham and the surrounding villages, took part in a kind of serious uprising that threatened to spread to the nearby counties of Essex and Cambridgeshire. But the revolt was suppressed by the King and Dukes of Norfolk and Suffolk, with the aid of a local family. So we're walking down Bolton Street now. Suddenly, as you can see, the rain is coming down horribly. It is freezing cold. My hands are nearly falling off with the cold, but I'm doing my best to keep us going. 1.1 million, wow. Don't know what that's in relation to, but properties, yeah, I imagine. Yeah. Elizabeth I visited here during the royal progress of East Anglia in 1578, so Queen Elizabeth I was here. And like most of East Anglia, this was staunchly parliamentarian in the Civil War. So most of the places we go to on my tours are royalist, lots of royalist castles in the north. This was the opposite. It was a kind of strongholds, East Anglia, Newmarket, Cambridge, Ely. All around here was kind of Cromwell land, wasn't it? So these were very much the areas. So most of the landowners around here were all strong advocates of the parliamentarian cause. So they were people that believed in the emergent ideas of democracy. This idea of kind of no taxation without representation, and the fact that the landholders should have a greater share and say in the doing great anyway. Thank you very much. In the running of the country. Now, there was no battles as such here, but we know that there was a lot of support for the parliamentarian causes, and they did put forward troops to support the parliamentarian siege of Colchester. Susan talking about Colchester. The siege of Colchester in 1648 was supplied in part by soldiers recruited from here. So again, we're agricultural workers, and why I wanted to bring you down here was just to give you a sense of how sort of close we are, the edge of the village, to the agricultural land. And of course, a lot of this around here was sheep farming for the wool, but also arable farming. So it's always nice, I think, to see how a village is sort of set, as you might say. And so right at the edge of here, you're straight onto farmland. So I think it's really useful for us to kind of get that kind of setting. And the settlement here was struck with plague really badly in the year of 1666 and again in 1699. Smallpox hit in 1712 and 1713, and that killed over 1 in 6 of Lavenham's residents. So he said it's a real fair share of disasters, and none more so than when a bomb fell here in Bolton Street in 1941. It was a £500 bomb sent over by the German forces, and luckily, even though it created a great cavity in the road here, it didn't explode. Because if it had, almost every building within a sort of a 2-minute radius of here would have been completely destroyed. But they were able to get in there with the bomb, what they call bomb disposal people, the detonators, and they were able to make it safe. And then what was called a Bolton Billy, a big bomb 6 foot in length, was displayed in the Swan pub for many, many years. And it was a fundraising thing. You could put your coins in it. So if anybody who's been in the Swan, you may well remember seeing Bolton Billy, which was the great big shell that fell on Bolton Street, but miraculously didn't go off. £500 of explosive would have ripped the hell out of this beautiful village. So we can only be completely grateful. Lovely. Look at the willow, or hazel maybe. Gorgeous. I can see houses covered. There's not much thatch around here. I've not noticed much thatch, but we'll continue onwards. So we're going into Prentice Street and into Apprentices. So that's pretty unusual. They just had one kind of night of bombing, really. Even though they were surrounded by airfields around here, it wasn't really sort of a main area of activity. So they concentrated their fire on places like much more Colchester and obviously into East London. But it did leave a huge hole in the ground, which was there for a number of years. And daffodils are up there. Yeah, can we see daffodils? Yeah, some daffodils over here. Let's go and look at the daffodils. I'm just doing my best now to keep my kit dry. So we're sort of striking a balance now between what I'm able to kind of show you, the opportunities and the shots, with also just trying to keep everything dry, because obviously if it packs in because we're wet, that doesn't help anybody. So there is a degree of compromise required. But I mean, that's ultimately what guiding is about, isn't it? Is responding to circumstances not necessarily as we would wish them to be, but as they are. There's a lovely stream over here. I'll just give us a little shot over the stream. It's such a wonderful village. I mean, you can't knock it, can you? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, even in the wet. So, of course, supply of water, always necessary for anything with textiles, for cleaning the fleeces and the wools. Want a pink house, says Tish. Hope you got deep pockets, Tish. Or a lump sum coming your way, because these are very, very expensive properties. Dry gear, absolutely LSLS has got it. But let's go and look at some more Suffolk pink houses. So at Prentice Street. And let me just get across the road. So the screen has got wet now. You know, it's like your fingers are wet. They don't work very well. Wet and cold. Wet and cold today. So, isn't that pretty? So we're on Prentice Street now. So let's move up. I'm just trying to find something I can just clean my screen with, just so it works. So Prentice Street. Okay. Sorry about this. It's a bit difficult just to make things work as they should do when everything is wet. I'm trying to protect brollies and trying to do an awful lot all at the same time. It's amazing, yeah. There's so many old houses here, Mark. It's absolutely jam-packed. So Prentice Street, this is the home of the wool staplers hall that we're going to see in just a minute. And the wool staplers were dealers in wool. So a wool stapler is somebody who deals in wool. They buy wool from the producers, they sort and grade the wool, and then they sell it on. So a staple, we still talk about staple commodities, don't we? So that's what a wool stapler did. They were a dealer in wool. So this is, I think it's the next one's a wool staple cell. Just a walk past, but so many lovely contemporary designs worked in as well to these buildings, as well as, of course, the historic sort of maintenance. There is a great deal of care and attention, I think, taken to keeping them beautiful. So yeah, this is Wool Stapler's cottage. So as ever, we've got cottages, so smaller residences for the workers, and then bang next door to it, we've got the Wool Stapler's hall. So the person who was making the money, the big dealer, this is Wool Stapler's hall. Just here, again, another fabulous building. And in the 16th century, so Lavenham in Suffolk had become incredibly rich because it's blue broadcloth. And this woven cloth was exported as far as Russia, believe it or not. And the wool came from Lincolnshire, from Northamptonshire, from a range of places. It wasn't that all the wool came from this area, but the production process was particularly very, very highly valued and in demand. Sometimes even as far as the Cotswolds. And the broadcloth, the blue broadcloth, actually was 28 yards and 28 inches in length and 5'3" broad. And it was dyed first, hence the expression dyed in the wool. It was spun, woven, fulled, which is the cleaning of it, and finished in Lavenham. And in Water Street, where we walked down and talked about Harry Potter, where the river runs underground, the culverts, that's where the cloth was rinsed and cleaned to remove any kind of surplus pigments. And the water then flows down towards Oxford. Sorry, is there a question there? Sorry, so you'll have to excuse me because the rainwater is running down my glasses, which I know is a lousy excuse, but also the light of the screen and the lights mean it's very increasingly difficult for me to now to read. So, called parching, that's very, very interesting. Maybe, but of course, you come in summer and it is going to be full of people. So the success of the sale of this kind of blue broadcloth basically drives the explosive success of the wool trade. Incredibly effective because one of the famous wool towns. The colour blue that it comes from is dyed using a plant word, and the proper name for it is Isatis tinctoria. So woad is a pigment, it's not a dye. So it creates a physical reaction rather than a chemical one. And it clings to the wool. Yeah, I can take a moment to wipe them, but it's raining so hard into my face that they're not going to stay clean. So that doesn't really, it's not really a long-term solution. And over time, as you wear it, it fades. So like jeans, so woad is like that. So you've got to kind of constantly sort of change them. I did have, for those that kind of aren't familiar, if I can just get it up, but I'll just try and put these two up, but your skin doesn't work very well on phones. There we go. So that is the Lavenham blue. That is the kind of the woad blue. It was replaced over time by indigo. Indigo came and sort of replaced woad as a more effective, more kind of stable process, as well as different fashions and styles, which meant that the demand wasn't what it was as it had been in kind of years gone by. But at that time, that cloth there was the most fashionable cloth in Europe. And so the wealth that it generated for this town was monumental, which is how it came to be taxed so substantially. It ended up being more taxed, as I say, than York, from Lincoln. But isn't it lovely, Prentice Street? So this is this like uphill struggle that we've got. Colour comes to a plant, yeah, from the flowers. It's part of the cabbage family, is woad. And believe it or not, the flowers are yellowish, which is kind of strange. You wouldn't kind of expect them to be yellow, but there we go. Gosh, this rain's coming down so hard now. I'm really kind of struggling a bit to keep everything kind of covered up, and me and working and walking. So if we get a bit of a wobble on, I'm sure you'll forgive me, but my body's about to blow inside out. We have really got some nasty weather going on now. We're coming into the market square. How are we doing for time? 47, so we're okay. So hopefully we can get a bit of shelter in the market square. I'm sorry I can't read any of your texts right now, so I do apologise if anybody is asking me questions. But I say my glasses are completely, you can hear it pouring. Oh, it is absolutely chucking it down, yeah. So we're coming into the famous marketplace of Lavenham, the market square, where we've got the famous Guildhall of Corpus Christi Guild, the Angel Pub, and it's just absolutely delightful. Yeah, sorry about the weather, can't do much about that. If you've enjoyed it up until now, this is, if you like, the pièce de résistance. Right in the heart of the village, we've got, the Guildhall, the Market Cross, you can see. So, this is what was made from the back of the wool trade, or particularly the dyeing of the wool. And they also use urine, by the way, in case you know, that's what fulling is cleaning wool with urine. And people would store up and sell their urine to dealers, and that would help fix the colours. So this is the Angel Pub, the oldest pub, we think, from dating back to, in parts, to the early 15th century, or at least into the archway. I can't really see anywhere that I can get much by way of shelter, but we'll have a little walk around. So if any of you is familiar with the film Witchfinder General, Vincent Price Witchfinder film from 1968, the scene of burning witches was filmed in this kind of market square here. John and Yoko filmed an experimental film from Balloon, got Apotheosis in 1969. That was filmed from Matthew Hopkins, absolutely. So John knows it's your part of the world. Witchfinder General. We'll go into this canopy for a little bit. Sharon Tate, who famously, of course, became victim to the Manson family. She filmed her last film here, a film called 13 Chairs, which was set here. So quite a lot of filming. So when the Harry kind of Potter crew came, it wasn't a kind of new thing for Lavenham. It was sort of more of a continuation of long periods. You might be familiar, those that watch British TV, Lovejoy, the sort of sleuth antique dealer. A lot of that was filmed around here. So lots and lots of times. So you can see, can't you? I mean, it's not greatly surprising. Do Manning Tree, plenty of witches around there. It's a case of when I'm down here in this part of the world, if I can, we'll get there. So we've got the Market Cross, which dates as a gift to the town in 1530. Absolutely beautiful. And the markets here date from 1257. That's when the charter is given by King Henry III, which enables the setting up of markets. So, of course, the market is a right. It's not just something you can do. So they were given that right in 1257. So not so long ago, they had the 750th anniversary of the granting of the charter. And around, we're going to look at the Guildhall kind of last, I think. But again, we've just got these fabulous buildings. And they're just cheek by jowl. And this is, again, sections of the Harry Potter film were shot in this area. And you can see why, can't you? Because there's just so many amazing buildings. This is the little hall over here. It's not even the big hall. It's the home of one of the guilds. There's 4 guilds here. The guilds, of course, were organisations that were sort of both religious. They were called confraternities. So they were organised around faith. But also they regulated trade. Prices, training, apprenticeships. We've been apprentice lane, haven't we? So people will become masters in their craft at the end of it. So they would have guild halls, which were both kind of like business centres. So a place where you come and do business, where you could sell your cloth, make the deals, particularly for export, of course. Also quality standards. You know, if we think about trade, we think about it as almost a contemporary thing, don't we? Trade deals, but it goes back as long, you know, as there's been resettlement. You know, people buying and selling, and of course, quality standards are really important. If you're going to sell a woad cloth, and then it's going to go all the way to France or to Germany, somewhere in the Low Countries, you need to know that when it arrives, it's what you wanted. It's the right weight of cloth, it's the right colour. So quality standards, the agreement between kind of traders of what equates to what is really important. So that's what the guilds did. Prices, quality standards, training, wages, welfare. So retired weavers kind of falling, you know, on their uppers, if you like, you know, perhaps widows of weavers that died, they could expect to be able to get some form of kind of support. And the whole thing was sort of pulled together. There was almost always a patron saint was associated. So St. John was associated with both the Little Hall and the main guild hall we're going to have a look at a moment. But aren't they? Yeah, I think, Elizabeth, it's for those that I don't make any kind of comment, but for those that are into more of a kind of a small state kind of mindset, the guilds would be very much how they would kind of see things. So business regulating business. Now, there's always the question about whether in a capitalist system, you know, business can operate without regulation. But in effect, that's what they did. They created their own regulatory environment. So, you know, some will find that an interesting, like Novick and various other these kind of right-wing free market thinkers would find that kind of very interesting kind of proposition. But of course, they don't have that kind of power these days because we've set up government, local government, regional government, which tends to carry out, doesn't it, these kind of functions of kind of regulation, and then they appoint bodies to kind of oversee, you know, training bodies and examination bodies and this sort of thing. But that's what they did. So I love this over here. This was one of the pictures that I fancied. But thank you, Candice and Dawes. Yes, the original windows in the Little Hall. I mean, I can promise you that glass needs replacing over time. Not least because a lot of glass doesn't properly set. So consequently, over time, it gets thick. It gets thicker at the bottom than it is at the top, and then becomes brittle and breaks. So almost certainly the glass will have been replaced. But isn't it fantastic? You know, just the sheer number and the variety of the houses here. And some of these shop units, look at the lovely old Hovis sign here. Isn't it absolutely magnificent? I don't know how well you can sort of see now in this light, because obviously we're struggling a little bit with the light. But let me just go up. On the vines, yes. Beautiful, isn't it? Let me just give you come off that if I can, and I'll give you a vertical shot. So who wouldn't want to go and buy their Hovis there? Hovis, by the way, is bread, in case those that from North America might not be familiar with that particular brand. So I'll just spin you back round. So let's go and look at the guild hall. So this is the guild hall of Corpus Christi, literally the body of Christ. So if we're thinking about the bakers, quite literally Corpus Christi is the body of Christ. So of course, you know, at both the Last Supper and of course every sort of sacrament thereafter, you know, those particularly in the Catholic faith believe that is a moment where the bread or the wafer quite literally becomes the body of Christ, and the wine, of course, the blood of Christ. So Corpus Christi is very, very closely related, of course, to the Last Supper and God, my brain's just gone dead for a minute. The second coming, as you might say, of Jesus. So what we call transubstantiation, isn't it? That when you go through this ceremony, it actually literally kind of translates at the same time. Trying to keep it secret, yeah. So this has been a variety of things. In its heyday, of course, this was the guild, the headquarters. So you can see the size of it. This really does. I mean, the Merchant Ventures in York is a wonderful guild hall, but it's probably only half the size of this one. So Resurrection, that's what I was talking about. I don't know why that on my brain. But you just look at the size of this guild hall. It is absolutely enormous. Absolutely enormous. So that gives you a real kind of clue about the wealth that we're talking about here. It is, you know, kind of wealth beyond measure that created this. But of course then it falls on hard times. So 15th century originally, yep. But then of course, and you can see a wonderful kind of twisty timbers again, as that prosperity begins to change, as I say, it's competition from Dutch immigrants in Colchester. They bring new techniques and they create walls which become more fashionable. So the guild hall's role kind of changes. And by 1689, it was being used for what they call a bridewell, which effectively was a cell, prison, a reform school for petty offenders. People in prison for minor crimes such as begging, kind of being idle, disorderly. And they were intended to kind of reform the poor through kind of hard labour and whippings, making them useful members of society. It's hard to imagine you'd really kind of motivate someone by whipping them, but that's what they did. There was a story here of a little girl, Anne Baker, in 1783, she was aged 12, and didn't have enough straw to sleep on. There wasn't enough water to drink, and they weren't allowed out in case they escaped. So it really was a sort of terrible punishment for being poor. And they were whipped until they bled, and they were forced to share rooms with adult men, so a 12-year-old girl, and often the worst offenders were put in thumb screws or leg irons. So they really kind of knew how to be nasty and horrible. I just live in a garret in this building. So some of these were then deported to Australia. So they'd spend months on end in chains below decks on crowded ships. So this may have been their kind of last residence on these shores before being deported, transported to Australia. It was also used as a workhouse, so you had poverty-stricken children and the elderly here spinning hemp and flax and yarn. And so it went through all these kind of different phases, and eventually it was bought by the town's MP, a Mr. Quilter, and gifted to first the Lavenham Preservation Society and ultimately in 1951 to the National Trust. And it is now owned by the National Trust. And if you go inside, you can find... I was hoping to go in today, but it was closed. It is fantastic exhibitions and information all about its kind of history and various iterations. They don't shy away from the fact that it was, used as a prison and a place of kind of detention and torture and this, that and the other. But of course, an awful lot of it is about its heyday as a kind of guildhall. So it's also an almshouse, so providing accommodation for the elderly. Because obviously once the economy crashed, a lot of people struggled to make a living here. So they had to look at the kind of support networks. So we're going to walk down Lady Street. The light is very poor, but I'd like to just show us the church before. And American troops, by the way, were stationed here. So if anybody has any relatives that were stationed here, they partied away in the Guildhall during the war. It was a place of entertainment. And there was a huge massing of American and British troops in southern and eastern Britain prior to 1944, so prior to the big push. And of course, D-Day, the landings, going over to France, and the beaches, which, Patrick Earp has shown you a number of times. This is kind of where they were based. So there's an awful lot of kind of downtime for these guys. So there's an awful lot of partying in the villages. But aren't these looking beautiful now? The lights are coming up. So let's walk down Lady Street, and we're going to have a look at the church. So I'm sorry we sort of sped up a little bit there, but the rain has now slackened off a little bit, so it's a bit easier. But when I started this round the corner, I literally couldn't see. The rain was running right into my face. So yes, we've still got American air bases. Absolutely right, Susan. So there's big, strong military, and of course, was that boy Harry was round this part, wasn't he? The young lad that got knocked. Was it a motorbike or a push bike? He was killed, wasn't he? But unfortunately, the lady who just arrived and forgot and drove on the wrong side of the road. And Secoulis, is it? Something. An awful case. I mean, I know people were sort of very angry about justice, but it's just awful all round. Just a tragic waste of life. But that's the reality, of course, isn't it? Of arriving in a foreign land there's a lot to think about, and driving on the wrong side of the road is a mistake I think all of us have probably made. Was it in Oxfordshire? Was it? Oh, okay, I thought it was around. Anyway, so another American airbase. So we're coming back onto the top end of Water Street, but we're going to turn the opposite way around now towards, I think it's Water Street, this one, towards the church. But don't they look glorious as the light is coming up? Yeah, Howard Marks. Yeah, he was arrested in the Swan pub in 1980. So yeah, Mr. Nice, he's dead now, unfortunately, but quite literally. So you can see through the window now of the roof beams. My deceased husband flew in out of Middlehall. Oh, so he'll have known this area. So I mean, what a beautiful place. You can imagine what those American GIs must have thought, being based at RM and whatever they were that were based here. They really kind of landed on their feet, hadn't they, in terms of a location. So. Right, so this is Water Street. So if we go down this way, we'll get towards the church. Thank you, Anne. So we're going to come up by the Swan. So again, those didn't get what I was saying there. The Swan pub here, which is a very historic inn here, beautiful place to stay and eat. Howard Marks, who was something of a character, a sort of A-grade marijuana smuggler, a very, very heavy-duty guy, ended up doing a long time in prison, both in America and over here. He was arrested here in 1980. But when he eventually came into freedom before he died not so long back of cancer, I believe, he wrote a book called Mr. Nice, telling his stories and anecdotes, very charming, very funny. Took that out on the road and became sort of unlikely sort of superstar of the spoken word circuit. But as he died, don't they just look beautiful, Diane? Yeah, absolutely. So let's go and have a look at the church. So the church, for those that don't know, features, again, very much, I think the church is down here, is that right? In Harry Potter. So by late 1997, Harry Potter and his friends Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger were searching for the Horcruxes of Lord Voldemort, in an attempt to defeat him once and for all. That obtained Slytherin's locket in September by infiltrating the Ministry of Magic. But the negative energy within the locket caused them to part company with Ron. They all fell out. And Hermione stayed with Harry, and they decided it was time to revisit Godric's Hollow. Harry wanted to visit the grave of his parents, buried in the church here at Godric's Hollow. Hermione was worried it might be a trap, so she spent time working on the various curses and protections that she could to ensure they'd be safe. Sorry, the rain is coming down again. Is this Church Street on the corner? If it starts raining much harder, I may well just abandon because we've had our hour and not take us any further because I don't want my kit to get any wetter than it is. So the Godric's Hollow, yeah, it was filmed here. If I can get us around to the church, but as I say, this rain really is coming down hard again. But let's just see. We'll give it another minute. But as you can imagine, once phones get wet, it takes a long time. The church is just over here, so you can just sort of see over here. I mean, we'll think we're slightly over time anyway. So I don't think you've been shortchanged. It's more that I just wanted to bring you to see this fabulous church right at the end. So, of course, what I'm doing is I'm now sort of mixing real life with the events of the Harry Potter novels, because obviously, as I say, Deathly Hallows film was filmed here. So in the story, this village, which had been home to Harry as a baby and his parents, so consequently his parents were buried in the churchyard. Harry decides that he wants to visit the church, he wants to visit the grave of his parents. And they practice various charms, and they arrive wearing the cloak of invisibility. So they hope that they're going to be able to pass unnoticed, and that muggles that happen to be around wouldn't see them because they were Christmas shopping. It's that time of year. But while they're in the village, it became clear they weren't invisible to everyone. And when they passed the war memorial in the middle of the village, on the way to the graveyard, what they heard was a voice which made it clear that somebody could see them. So in this graveyard, famously, in the book of course, we have the graves of Dumbledore's parents. We have the grave of Ignatius Peveril, as well as Harry's parents. And written on their grave, famously, they're saying the last enemy that should be destroyed is death, which meant kind of focus on living while you're here. So I'm just going to bring us in to have a look at the church. For those that have read the books, they will know it all went horribly wrong. Harry was attacked by Nagini, or Nagani, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It was Voldemort's snake. And he suffered terribly. But look at this. Look at this. This is what's known as a wall church. So this is an incredibly fine church. There's been a church here since the Anglo-Saxon times, but it was rebuilt hugely between 1485 and 1525. And it reflects the wealth of the town. Once again, as you can imagine, the more money was creating it. So there's several wealthy families putting money into this church, and they rebuilt it in an incredible fashion. It is an absolutely superb, one of the finest churches anywhere in England. Beautiful yew tree bushes, how you can see in the dark there, but there's corridors of yew bushes along the way. And ironically, Anglo-Saxon church around here, yeah, absolutely. Lots of Saxon church and early Christian activity. And you can say that rain's really coming down again. But of course, what this did was it further drew the attention of King Henry VIII. And Henry VIII had a method for collecting taxes that had been established by his father and a chap called Morton, who was the bishop. It's called Morton's Fork. Have you heard of Morton's Fork? Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Larry. So Morton's Fork was very, very sneaky, whereby you'd go visiting, and if the people put you up with very fine hospitality, they're obviously very, very rich and they can afford to pay more tax. But if they put you up and it doesn't seem that impressive, they've saved a lot of money, so they can afford to pay more tax. So you can see, whichever side of the fork you end up on, you're going to pay more tax. So Henry basically sent out his tax collectors, looked at Lavenham, and basically said they could afford to pay a lot more tax. And this was just before the Reformation. So consequently, this was the last period where Henry was always short of cash. He was about to fleece the church, but that hadn't happened yet. And so instead, he used places like Lavenham as cash points. And so unfortunately, just at the moment where they were facing this incredibly stiff competition from Colchester, from changing styles and fashions, it's at that point that Henry VIII really turned the screw. And so they were kind of caught in a double whammy. The income was falling off a cliff, and at the same time the taxes were going up. So quite literally, King Henry killed the golden goose. Through his greed, through his desire to make money, he in effect bankrupted Lavenham. And it never again returned to anything like, perhaps until the sort of modern era, a place of wealth. It was a place of poverty, perhaps of genteel poverty, but of poverty nonetheless. Henry was a piece of work, absolutely. So guys, you can see with this weather, it's not much fun. It's a beautiful place to stand, but it's not a lot of fun for me right now standing outside here. The rain is siling down, and if I show you by the light, you can hopefully get a sense. Again, I can't see because of the brolly just blown inside out. I think you can probably get a sense that it is not far short of sort of stormy weather. So I'm going to just pull in underneath here to say my advice. I don't know if my fingers will even work now on the screen because everything is so wet. But there we go. So there I am. So thank you so much. Thank you, Alan, and everybody who's left tips. It's really grateful. Not least because I might buy some more kit now. But hopefully things will kind of dry up and be okay. I've really, really enjoyed bringing you here on this tour. But I do now need to get out of this rain because it is quite ferocious. So thanks everybody. I hope you got some fabulous postcards. And stick them all over social media, on your timelines, and let's really kind of push how beautiful Lavenham is. And I hope to see you very, very soon on Wednesday evening in Lincoln, another beautiful place. So thank you everybody. It's been lovely to see you all. And I'm going to go and try and get dry my kit, and then go and see my mum. So Beautiful, beautiful. I've loved being here. I'm delighted that you've all enjoyed it so much. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to come again one day. So thank you, everybody, for your tips, for your support, for your comments. Questions, I apologise that I've missed, because as I say, I just can't see with wet glasses. So that's the reality, unfortunately, of getting on a bit, isn't it? Is we need glasses, and then they're not much good in wet weather. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to go and get warm now. You see if I hold up how wet my hands are. Everything is absolutely dripping off me. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to see you very, very soon. Bye-bye. If it lets me switch off, I think my hands are so wet now, the finish tour button won't work.